This evening, I think I've talked to a lot of you. My name is Chris Paxson, and I'm Dean of the Woodrow Wilson School. This is one of a series of lectures that we have every year in New York. They're the Thoman Lectures. We're very grateful to the Thoman family for supporting these. And we do them on a variety of topics. The topic of this evening's conversation is how to strengthen families and promote child well-being. That's a pretty broad topic. But I think the speakers we have tonight take a really have very interesting perspectives on this issue. What they're focusing on is the demographic trends that maybe complicate the issue of how to strengthen families and promote child well-being. And those demographic trends are greater non-marital childbearing, and perhaps more important, increasing divides in family life between both low and high SES families, and also across families who live in different regions of the country. And this is the sort of red families versus blue families described in Carbone and Naomi Cahn's book. So I'm going to give very brief introductions, and I think the speakers will actually give fairly brief talks so that we can have a lot of time for conversation. So let me quickly introduce them. Garfinkel is the Mitchell I. Ginsberg Professor of Contemporary Urban Problems at Columbia University, and he's currently a co-principal investigator of the Fragile Families and Child Wellbeing Study with Sarah McClanahan. Sarah was supposed to be here tonight. She's ill, or was filling in for her, which I'm very grateful for. And they have recently also released a Future of Children volume co-produced by Princeton and Brookings on fragile families that picks up from this study. June Carbone is the Edward A. Smith Missouri Chair of Law, the Constitution and Society at the University of Missouri at Kansas City, and Naomi Cahn is the John Theodore Fay Research Professor of Law at the George Washington University Law School. I could say they're both graduates of the Woodrow Wilson School, which is great. And together they have produced a very interesting book titled Red Families v. Blue Families, produced by Oxford University Press, published in 2010. So just to tell you, after the talk, and we'll have brief presentations, a lot of time for conversation, there are some copies of the book in the back, which are for sale, and there will be a signing. And we also have a lot of free issues of the Future of Children volume on fragile families. So with that, we'll start with Irwin Garfinkel.
So I think I'm a sort of okay substitute for Sarah. Sorry she couldn't be here. I'm not going to say much about the design of the study because it's described in great detail in the Fragile Families volume, the special issue. So let me, since I've been told I have only 10 minutes and I'm used to speaking in 60-minute bites, I may speed things up a little bit, but I will keep my eye on my time. So what motivated this study, this slide shows what motivated the study. There's been an increase in non-marital childbearing for all groups. Blacks, whites, Hispanics, the slope, if you look at the slope of those lines, they're virtually identical. Blacks started higher, Hispanics in between, the whites at the lowest, but they've increased at the same rate. And overall, in the United States today, the latest figures indicate that 40% of births are to unmarried couples. So that's a very big, it's an important new phenomenon and requires study. So just a couple, this slide just indicates the different chapters in the volume, and I'm going to say something about all the chapters. So the first thing, and this comes out of the first chapter, and this is probably the most one of the most important findings of the study is at birth, the couples have high hopes for their relationship. And the first part of the high hopes is, first of all, half of them are living together. So these are not casual relationships. They're not one-night stands. These couples know one another, and indeed half are living together at birth. Another 30% are still romantically involved at birth. So 80% are a couple at birth. On the other hand, think about it, 20% are not. So that's, so is the glass full or the glass half empty? It's only 9 months after conception. But there's other evidence of high hopes, and probably, again, the father involvement is really striking. First of all, a huge portion gave money, bought things for the child, and I want to go right to the two bottom lines. 95% of the mothers indicate that the fathers want to be involved in raising their child, and 94% of the mothers want the fathers involved in raising the child. So there's potential here, and this is right at birth. We interviewed the moms in the hospital at birth, and we interviewed most of the fathers in the hospital. We got 75% of the fathers at the first, right at birth, and over the course of the study, we've got 86% of and these are the non-marital dads, 86% of them we interviewed at least once, which is remarkable. No other study has done that. And what we find is these high hopes at birth, but if you look 5 years out, incredibly high instability and growing complexity. So for the marrieds, 5 years after birth, 20% have split. This is not exactly low, but it's low by comparison to the breakup of the relationships of the unmarried parents, where if they were cohabiting, it's twice, it's closer to 40%. If they were romantically involved but not living together, 80% of them are no longer romantically involved. And if they weren't romantically involved, virtually none of them are romantically involved, but it's a small percentage become romantically involved, and actually about 1% actually get married. The ones who split go on to form new partnerships. And the same relationship, those who are not romantically involved at birth have the highest rate of new partnerships, well over 60%. And not only do they have new relationships, but they have new children. And that's the last set of bars there. So we knew a lot about the capabilities of the mothers. We knew much less about the capabilities of the fathers simply because of the way we collect data. If the fathers don't live with the mother and child, you can't hook them up to a child. You don't know who their child is in any particular survey. And in a conventional surveys, if you go and interview a family where there's a mother and child, you interview a family and you ask about a man in that family, you get underreporting of the fact that he's got children living elsewhere. So you only get about 60% of the dads who you can identify as being a non-resident dad from conventional surveys, whereas we got them because we interviewed them first. I want to call your attention to the fact that the capabilities of these unmarried parents are quite different from and lower than the capabilities of married parents. So they're younger. Most important, the thing that is most striking is education levels of unmarried parents. 3/4 of them have no more than a high school education. You all remember the story of Murphy Brown? There's practically no Murphy Browns other than on television. There are only a couple percent of unmarried mothers have a college education, let alone a master's degree or PhD in anything. Look at the bottom line there. Sorry, not the bottom line here. I'm going to skip to the next slide. This shows you the education, the economic status. Again, go to the bottom line. Fathers past incarceration. At birth, nearly 40% of the fathers unmarried fathers have a history of incarceration, and this is slight underestimate because it only relies on the mother and dad reports. If you use some other data that we have, it's higher than that. By the time you get to the 5-year data, half of all the unmarried fathers have a history of incarceration. I have to say, I've been studying poverty and low-income single mother parent families for most of my career. I was alive when the mass incarceration epidemic began. I didn't realize how important it was, even as we were beginning the study. I would say the single most important thing that we could do to promote families would be to end mass incarceration. Instability in father involvement. So the dads, despite the fact that they're not living with the kids, a fair number of them actually have a fairly high involvement with the kids. First of all, a little more than a third live with the kids by 5 years. And of those who don't live with the kids, half of them have seen the child in the last month. So you're now talking about that portion. If you add it to the 36% that live with the kids, a fair amount of father involvement. And of the non-resident fathers who see the kids, they see them on average 12 days a month. So the involvement is not trivial. On the other hand, there's a good portion that are not involved at all. What we know about child well-being, and there's a slew of research papers on this, is that instability and complexity affect children's well-being negatively. Lower cognitive ability, more asthma and obesity, more depression and anxiety, more aggressive behavior, especially the boys, and attention problems. And these are related causally to the instability and complexity of the families. So summing up, the children who are born to unmarried parents begin life with many disadvantages, and the disadvantages pile up. And knowing that such a high fraction of our nation's children are born into these fragile families, and that these children face many obstacles, should cause serious reflection on what we mean by equality of opportunity. In terms of what can be done, we divide this simply into prevention, reducing early childbearing. 44% of mothers have their first birth as a teen, reducing incarceration, and increasing opportunities for community college. All those are discussed in the volume. In addition, we discuss in the volume strengthening the safety net, because we're never going to reduce to zero fragile families. Even if we are wildly successful, we're going to have a lot of fragile families for a long time. And so we need to increase their security and get the incentives right in terms of safety net policy. And we also need to learn from marriage and fatherhood programs. And Elizabeth said if I didn't mention the 3 T's, she would strangle me. So treat early, treat often, and treat together. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you going to talk to him?
Naomi's going to start. Do you want to start from here? And I'll start. Oh, okay. Let me just look.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you. Thank you, Woodrow Wilson School, and thank you all for being here. Thank you. There we go. I actually just want to start with a story about the Woodrow Wilson School. When I was a student, and I'd completely forgotten about this until we were chatting just before this started, and I told Irwin June this story. When I was a student at the Woodrow Wilson School more than 30 years ago, I wanted to write my senior thesis on what was then called daycare or childcare. I was really interested in looking at childcare across different income groups, looking on it as more and more women were entering the workforce, and my advisor almost literally patted me on the head and said, gee, I don't really think that's a good topic for a public policy thesis. Perhaps you should find something else. Well, that of course spurred me on, and ever since then I've been working on families, gender, and public policy. And since 2001, June and I have been working on those issues together. The idea for this book started in 2004 when we woke up after the election, and we woke up to the moral values vote. And people were saying, well, what is it about the moral values voters in the moral values voting states? The states that are voting red have higher teen birth rates and higher rates of divorce than are the states that are voting blue. What is it that's going on? June and I thought, still do, think we have at least part of the answer to that. Thank you.
In taking a look at this, we start the story in the 50s. Why? For 2 reasons. First, look at the numbers. Women having sex before the age of 21 then increased from 1950 to 1960, 40% to 70%. Brides who gave birth within 8.5 months of the wedding in 1960, 30%, the highest number since 1800. Average age of marriage, 20 for women, 22 for men, the youngest ages in a century. And if you take the year 1963, 80% of college women wanted 3 or more children, about the same as non-college women. That would fall. By 1973, only 29% still wanted that many children. We start in the 50s because we want to start with the idea something happened before what people call the sex revolution of the 60s and 70s. That what happens afterwards is dealing with a large-scale set of changes, not simply a change in values. And we get a good laugh from the slide. Where are we today? Did you all get to see it? Okay. Where are we today? We love and have been quoting Sarah McClanahan's piece on the second demographic transition since we started on this topic. What we want you to note about these 2 slides is what happens after 1990. And can everybody hear me? Am I picking up on the mic? Okay, you notice, if I were to describe the 50s, we went through it together. You look at the slope of these lines, they're similar. 1980, these are trends in single motherhood. The group with high education, which are basically top quarter by mothers' education, college graduates, starts to decline. The least educated women go sky high, but in the era from 1990 to 2000, which is a relatively prosperous time period, it declines. But look at the middle. The middle is still going up in the 90s. That's the middle of the country in terms of education. take a look at the divorce rates. Now, this is the year of the marriage measured 10 years later. Again, if you look at what's taking place for the group that marries in 1970, the lines are parallel. Those who go to college, those who don't, there's some differences, but they're moving in the same direction. Starting with those who marry around 1980, so 10 years later we're talking about 1990, what you see is a big drop in divorce rates for the college educated. We were going to family law conferences in the 90s, and people are talking about how divorce has leveled off. It's not leveling off, it's going in two different directions. So it's falling pretty dramatically for college graduates and continuing to rise for everyone else. Why is this happening? Our thesis is that there are two different family systems. I'm going to start with blue, which is on the bottom. That in response to a very different economy, you have a new, what we call blue system. Starts with college graduates, but is concentrated on the coasts and the upper Midwest. And it talks about that the new ethical principle is control of childbearing. Don't have the child until you're ready, but we really don't care who you're sleeping with. An emphasis, and there are studies on the new generation coming along and what it means to be an adult. Emotional maturity, financial independence are the sine qua non of adulthood, not getting married, having a job, graduating from school. This correlates later ages of marriage, lower rates of divorce, and greater emphasis on tolerance and equality in the public sphere, ethics, discipline in the private sphere. What we call in red would have been a universal set of values in the country in the 50s. A focus on controlling sexuality, abstinence until marriage, requiring younger ages of marriage and childbearing, and today that is going to produce higher rates of divorce, higher rates of remarriage, and higher fertility rates. Let's go back. This is from the slides in the second demographic transition. When we start going into causes, if you look at the change in mothers' median age of marriage from 1960 to 2000, what you see is that top group is increasing more rapidly. By 1990, the increase in age has leveled off for the other groups. And now I want to look at this demographically. This is age of first marriage by state. Looks a lot like those red-blue election maps. Here are divorce rates, not exactly the same, but again, some correlation. Teen birth rates, these are figures that were just released in the last 2 days. And you can see that when you look at teen birth rates, there are quite dramatic differences in fertility. This is for whites only. These are the teen birth rates for whites. And this map puts it all together. I can explain what it means, but here's the bottom line. It's by county, and it's a composite figure measuring something called, on which side of this divide is your county. High fertility rates are red, high abortion rates are blue, high cohabitation rates are blue, high teen birth rates are red. And a little bit about how it maps onto the election system. So the 2004 slide, at the state level, the Electoral College vote, correlation with that earlier map about family form, 0.87. It's one of the strongest demographic correlations you can have. Falls to 0.83 in 2008. And I want to comment a little bit on two pieces of this that feed into public policy, and then we'll leave the rest of that for discussion. The first is that our book really started getting attention when Ross Dotot did a column on it in the New York Times. And in it, he said, well, you know, most of what you describe about the blue system is right, but doesn't it ultimately depend on access to abortion? People supported us, looking at figures like this that are, you know, that group that tends to marry later, have, higher educated, less divorce. What you see is the abortion rate is really low, higher for other groups in the country. And we left it at that. But we have been bothered by another part of it. And Rick Banks, who's a Stanford law professor, written a new book on the African-American middle-class women and what's happening to family, made the point, we thought he was right more generally. Yes, once you embrace an idea, you're not going to get married until 29, contraception follows as a matter of course, abortion rates are quite low. But abortion is important in holding the line on the acceptability of single-parent pregnancies as the norm. If you look at the abortions, 13 versus the number of unplanned pregnancies, which is a rate per 1,000 women, it's actually a higher rate, a higher percentage of the unplanned pregnancies will end in abortion. So unplanned pregnancies are pretty low, but the abortion rate among the unplanned pregnancies are higher than the line on single-parent pregnancies. If you're going to insist on an anti-abortion stance, then either you have to have the shotgun marriage in place, or you have to be more accepting of single parents. How about the divorce rate? And this is one other piece I want to put in place. Paul Amato, in a book called Alone Together, did a wonderful study looking at marital happiness and how it had changed between 1980 and 2000. He wanted to answer the question, why aren't we happier? And the answer is, it looks a lot like those figures in the 90s. The people who are happy are actually happier than they were in 1980. There are more seriously unhappy couples, and they're headed to divorce. This slide summarizes it in terms of financial distress. Of course, people in financial distress are more likely to divorce than those who aren't. But in 1980, the differences were small. By 2000, they became much larger. And that was a good time economically. One of the things Amato emphasizes is that when you ask why, that part of it has to do with the role of women's employment. So if women are working and they have a career, and the husband and wife both want the wife to be working, actually that group is less divorce prone in 2000 than in 1980. But if the woman is working full-time and she's working full-time because her husband can't support her, she would prefer to be home with the kids. She is more divorce prone in 2000 than she was in 1980, and she's very unhappy. When you then map that on to the geographic and class dimensions we talked about, the group that expects a traditional marriage, that marries young, is going to find the husband is less likely to be able to support the wife in 2000 than 1980, and the dissatisfaction over the roles has increased. One final slide on the politics. This is simply polarization by abortion. What we do in the book, I won't give you all the details, is we talk a lot about how policies are decided at the state level. We track the changes in law, which are at the state level and map onto these divides. But if you look at the idea of polarization, what you see is that abortion has become a marker of partisan identity. And the big recent change, if you go back to the 70s, the Southern Baptist Convention in 1972 was pro-choice. It becomes a marker of political identity in the 90s. And what happens in the last 5 years, people who think of themselves as conservative Republicans aren't particularly religious or who belong to a religion without a strong anti-abortion stance have become much more anti-abortion because they're conservatives. And so you're seeing a set of feedback loops that we argue affect family, affect the possibilities of social policy. Our last slide, this should be who do you want your daughter to marry? The reason the shotgun marriage has ultimately failed and the solution of the 50s doesn't work is, the Palins are not alone in being relieved when their daughter decides not to marry the father of the child. Thank you.
So, do you want to sit and I'll ask some questions? I thought it would be, I know people may have a lot of questions. I wanted to just lead off with a few, and I thought it might be useful to shift from from a lot of the really interesting facts that these three have laid out and talk a little bit more about policy. And I know a lot of people in the audience will have questions. There were two policy issues that I was particularly interested to hear more about, and one, which I was going to ask Earth to comment on, but Judy and Naomi may also have thoughts about that, is what we've learned about the value and success of marriage programs or fatherhood programs. We hear a lot about them.
So what we know is not a lot, but we've had experimental evaluation now, early results on marriage initiative, practically nothing on experimental on fathers programs. But the bottom line for the demonstration, the experiment as a whole, is that there was no effect. Across, I think it's 8 sites, maybe it's 6, I forget the exact number, but no effect. But there are 2 extreme outliers here. One is Oklahoma City, which had lots of positive effects, and the other is Baltimore, which had a lot of negative effects. And the second subgroup finding is that while overall there are no positive or negative effects, for blacks there are positive effects. So what do we make of that?
And when you say positive effects, you mean parents are staying together, they're married?
Yes, they're better relationships, less violence, and more. There's actually not more marriage. Sorry, not more marriage. There's not, even in Oklahoma, there's not more marriage. But there are positive effects on couple relationships. So yeah, I was just at Brookings talking about this same thing the other day, and both Ron Haskins, who's my favorite conservative, he calls me his favorite socialist. So actually, I call him my favorite Neanderthal. But, he likes to make a lot of the subgroup effects and the fact that Oklahoma City did really well. It's hard to do that, because anytime you have lots of places where you're trying some things, it may work in one place, it may not work in another place, and it's almost impossible to tease apart what's going on. It could be literally just natural variation, and the true effect is 0. That would be my take. If you're more optimistic, you would look to Oklahoma and you would say, whoa, there's differences in the way Oklahoma implemented it. If only we could implement nationally the way Oklahoma did, things would be hunky-dory. That may be true. Conversely, you could say, well, if everybody did the way Baltimore did, it could be a disaster. So I think that's a long answer to your question.
Right.
And we've actually done a little bit of work looking at that issue, but I think the sort of the tongue-in-cheek answer that June and I would say, and then we'll elaborate on it, is send everybody to college. Because if you look at the marriage rates of college-educated women, they've gone down in the past 20 to 30 years, but they are now above the marriage rates of women who've never been to college. So it used to be that by the age of 30, women who had not been to college were about 10% more likely to be married than were women who had been to college. Today, women who graduated from college are 2% more likely at the age of 30 to have ever been married. So that's a sort of tongue-in-cheek answer. For all of our problems, college is not the solution for every teen, for every non-marital mother. It's not the marriage promotion solution that it's not the ideal marriage promotion solution. But we also, of course, I'll let James go ahead.
Yeah, I have a completely different reaction, which is, in the book, we cautiously endorse the marriage promotion programs as much less ideologically divisive. Whether or not they work, we're happy to wait for. But the reason we emphasize that is, ask the question, what's the difference between Maryland and Oklahoma? Oklahoma is one of the extreme outliers on all of the material we looked at in terms of still being on the traditionalist side of the demographic transition. One of the youngest ages of marriage in the country, a relatively poor state, very traditional values. And what comes out of a lot of the marriage promotion studies, which are based on the empirical literature on divorce, is yes, encourage commitment and encourage activities like going to church together, but don't get married too young, be realistic about finances, keep lines of communication open, watch for the warning signs of domestic violence. And I think in a marriage-centered state like Oklahoma, that message means something very different than it does in Baltimore.
That's interesting. So another thing I want to put on the table, and then we'll open it up. But the two of you had a really interesting article in the Huffington Post on the consequences of the current. I guess we're not allowed to call it a recession anymore. We're out of the recession. The current slow economic growth on some of the growth. Slow. On some of the demographic trends we're looking at, some of the political pressures too on family law.
Yeah, I mean, our argument was if you're thinking about tough economic times, that part of what a two-parent family does is to give you two people with different kinds of jobs. So the Great Recession, when you look at it, produced a dramatic decrease in employment concentrated in particular in the construction and manufacturing sectors. And it had a particularly disproportionate impact on the job prospects of less educated men. Our prediction, what's about to happen in Missouri, we're terrified, is the decline in state budgets that everybody foresees happening with the end of the stimulus spending. That will disproportionately affect school teachers, government workers, again, more women next time around. If you've got a family with both, your chances one of them will stay employed go up, but the stressors on those families in the middle increase.
So why don't we then? Do you want to add anything to that, or no? Questions? I think we're happy to have questions about specific call. I have more questions I can ask, but yes.
Well, it's hard to tease out what would be the right policy. On the one hand, if you look at these young teenage girls who are pregnant and not married, it would be better for them to be married. But we also clearly know that if people get married earlier, they're more likely to get divorced later. And so it seems that the solution to one issue just causes another one down the road. So kind of what part of the chicken and egg cycle does it make sense to come in on?
So I think your point is well taken. I think the marriage initiative is potentially positive in the sense that if we can educate our children on the value of having two parents rather than one, and create institutions that nourish that, that's a plus. But prevention is, I would emphasize prevention here, and delaying childbearing, I think, is critical. And I think the kinds of things that my co-presenters were talking about and the different value structures are very important in that regard. And I would just add one more thing. I want to emphasize again incarceration. If you wanted to design a program, an initiative to break up families, I can hardly think of anything better than arresting as many men as you could, throwing them in jail, scarring them for life, not just economically, but you deprive someone of their liberty, you put them in an institution. You know, we used to put people in stocks during the, as punishment for crime, during the colonial era. And we stopped that practice because we thought it was inhumane. I'm for going back to stocks.
There's actually, it is a complex chicken and egg problem, and I think
we'd all agree, at least up here, I'm not sure about, well, we'd all agree on the idea of deterrence and of trying to prevent these teen births from happening in the first place. And one of the ways is through sex education in the schools, and other ways are through better access to contraception. There's some wonderful solutions that are discussed, not only in our book, but in the future of future children volume about how to deter teen childbearing. Just, some statistics on that. The states with the highest teen birth rates are states that promote abstinence-only education. And so if you can change that, the states with the lowest teen birth rates, not necessarily the lowest teen abortion rates, but the lowest teen birth rates, are those that advocate abstinence plus or a more comprehensive approach to sex education. So that's one fairly concrete way of dealing with this deterrence issue. President Obama there was actually an article in the Washington Post today on Obama's funding of various sex education programs for teens, some of the controversy, but also the emphasis on evidence-driven programs. So one answer is deterrence. The second answer is to look at, okay, so you failed in deterrence. Then what do you do once you have teen moms? Is marriage promotion really the right way to go? June and I have talked about the need to prevent teen moms from having a second child. Involving fathers, of course, is important. And again, back to the Fragile Families, Future of Children, there's a wonderful article on how to support non-marital moms in college in order to help them continue their education while also responding to the needs of their children.
Yes, right
Yeah,
here.
I have two observations. One, I think that in my experience, I'm a pediatrician and had a life to observe this. But to me, it looks like we've emasculated the father in this whole process. And that you read about the book Island, that we've delayed adolescence, adulthood, and young men. We've taken away essentially all the responsibility of being a father. I remember when I first started practice, it was a positive, happy event when a mother would get pregnant, and now it's just an event. It's kind of become just a process. And so I think to look at the role of fathers, we somehow got to put more respect into being a young man in our society. And it gets back to the education thing. We see males less likely to go to college, females are more likely to go to college, and these things are all converging. The second thing that kind of relates to that is that, and so like a father doesn't have to be responsible for providing health insurance for his child today, because we got CHIP and Medicaid. And I'm the first one to say that kids need health insurance, but essentially, kind of some basic responsibilities that fathers in the past had, they don't have to do it. So it's kind of become casual, from my perspective, of having children. The second thing is, at birth, we don't make it an event that is the father's intimately involved. And I often wanted a study done where, the fathers used to be in the delivery room. Now, very often, the mother is there alone. But the father was there. They gave him the first bath. They held the baby first before anybody else did. And I think that we really miss an opportunity that first day or two of life to permanently bond that father.
It'd be interesting to hear what Earth has to say about that. Because the Fragile Families today, it was very surprising when they found out that fathers actually were there.
We actually thought about doing designing an intervention which would do exactly what you're saying, ensuring that the father literally held the child right after birth. So I would agree with that. I just want to say one brief thing about child support, which is I happen to have some area of expertise in that. I think it's one of the worst things we did. You're factually wrong. Poor fathers are held to pay for the birth costs, and they pile up arrearages they can never pay. This is an obligation of society as a whole, and to hold fathers individually responsible for that in terms of paying child support, for poor fathers who are never going to be able to do that, that's a mistake. So I agree with your second point, but I don't agree with
And well, let me just see if we can other language.
I have two questions. One was, what, if any, role do churches play, particularly in the red states, in either promoting some of these deleterious ideas you talked about, or in trying to mitigate their damage to families? And the second question, is there any compelling evidence that in the red states this cycle actually makes the states poorer and worse off, where you can sort of argue that these family policies are sliding them into the bottom half of American economy?
Okay, on the first question, on the role of religion, it's complex in this sense. If you look at evangelicals, wonderful book on evangelicals and any other religious group, the 25% that are the most active really look different in terms of beginning sexual activity at a later age, healthier marriages, etc. Religion works. For the people who go to church once a week or more, and where both the husband and the wife both believe in it. The problem, when you take that and you try to extend it from the 25%, and I'm saying the 25% of evangelicals, not the 25% of the general population, and you try to extend it, maybe so you get 35% of evangelicals, the policies that focus on abstinence only, that get in the way of a norm of responsible contraception, that encourage earlier marriages, don't work for other parts of the population. And to give you one example, in the period from roughly the mid-90s until roughly 2004, college-educated women saw unintended pregnancies decrease by 20%. For the bottom quarter of women, they went up by 29%. Why? We got rid of the institutions that systematize access to contraception.
The second part of the question was, is there a cycle going on in red states? First of all, June and I, we're going to call it both red states versus blue states, but not only was that title taken by somebody else on a wonderful book by Andrew Gilman, but it's also, we're describing family systems, we're describing systems of values. And so in red states, you find blue families, you find purple families. In blue states, you find red families and purple families, as well as blue families. And so we're talking about these different we're talking about different family systems, values, as opposed to completely being able to map them onto states. That being said, the red system, and Jude and I were not sure that, well, we were trying at the beginning not to take a position on which system we thought would be better in this economy. We wound up, however, being pushed by the data to say that in the 50s, a red system where one wage could support a family and where that wage could support a family without a college education, the red system works. Today, where there's a lot of community support for the red system works. It's just that in a post-industrial economy where you need two incomes in order to support a family, in most contexts, a system with a stay-at-home spouse with traditional gender roles is far less economically viable. I don't want to go back, so yeah.
Two questions. One is around the red and blue kind of the values, if immigrant status made a difference at all versus general population. And second is around fatherhood. I was wondering if when you talk about involvement in the child's life, how is that defined by the father versus the mother? So what I'm trying to get at, the difference between emotional and versus financial involvement. And kind of building on that is the question of like the employment status of the father at the time, meaning that if they didn't have a job, they didn't feel like they could financially contribute, and therefore they felt like they didn't want to be involved. And I'm not sure that you're able to tease that out from the data. And in employment, if there's any difference in terms of being involved in the formal versus informal economy.
Sure, I'll take so first of all, the overwhelming majority of men who are engaged in the informal economy get most of their money from the formal economy. It's like there are only about 3% of those who are in informal who aren't in the formal. That's remarkable. So that's the first thing. So you can't separate that. The second thing is unemployment is the single biggest driver of father involvement and father support. It is the case, it's true that fathers can visit and take care of their kids. That's a possible substitute for money, but it turns out they're complementary. They're not really substitutes. In the real world, if a daddy can't bring home the bacon.
Yeah, and let me just add, one of the things we don't yet see are, I think, first-rate studies on the effect of income inequality, which is extraordinarily complex because it has to do not just with absolute inequality, but how men and women match up. If you look at the men below the 80th percentile, if you look at the group of less skilled men, the group that doesn't graduate from high school, their wages in real dollar terms are 80% of what they were in 1973. The women in their lives are better off. If you look at economic stability, how long does a person stay in a job? Women are doing better, men are doing worse. If you look at the top end, and again, I'm referring to Rick Banks' book, he argues that some of what's happening with African Americans at the middle class level is there are relatively few marriageable men compared to women, and that drives down the marriage rates of the entire group at the top end, not the bottom end. So there's a huge intersection with employment, but it's not just get men employed. It's how they match up with the women in their lives.
Yes.
Hi. I actually work for National Fatherhood Initiative, which was founded in 1994 and is one of the largest fatherhood organization in the country. And so I wanted to just make a few comments, but invite any responses in terms of the impact of the fatherhood programming, because what we do is basically provide resources to community-based organizations and prisons and military bases and all sorts of other, community-involved organizations around the country, and have trained, over 7,000 individuals on these curricula over the years. And our curricula has been evaluated and found to have positive results, but then we also have a lot of testimonies, from organizations, facilitators, and fathers who have, found them to be transformative in their lives. And there are a couple things that I just wanted to mention in terms of the teenage pregnancy and then the incarceration aspect and the employment aspect to tie into what folks have been saying. The incarceration, as many people know, recidivism rates in this country are about 50% of prisoners return to prison after leaving within 3 years. And some of that ties into policies, of arrests and that type of thing, but that's a really large number of people. And the Pew Center for States did a study which said that states spend $29,000 on average for 1 year of incarceration. And so, it's like $68 billion overall that we spend in this country on incarceration. And so one of the National Fatherhood Initiative programs called Inside Out Dad basically has fatherhood programming in over 300 prisons around the country. And so these fathers can learn about their own dad, reflect on their position with their kids, their moms, their partners of their kids. And it's really been transformative in the lives of many people. And so that if they leave prison and then don't come back, not only is that helping the children from the standpoint of the child well-being, but it's also saving us as society. And so I think with the fatherhood programming, certainly in the setting of prisons and in the reentry programs, we found that to be very positive.
That's really interesting. Thanks. We have time, I think, for one more question, so I'm trying to figure out who's had her hand up the most.
Thanks. So I'm Nikki Grist from the Alternatives to Marriage Project. And I I know that you know this. I'm going to just say it real quick for the audience and ask your opinion. When welfare as we knew it was changed in '96 under Clinton, Congress made the following findings. These are the first words of the act that created TANF, our federal welfare law. Marriage is the foundation of a successful society. Marriage is an essential institution of a successful society which promotes the interest of children. So this was the creation of TANF, which is the program that's supposed to be helping to lift these fragile families out of poverty. And so my question to you is, what do you think are the odds that when, hopefully, TANF is reauthorized, presumably under the current administration, what are the odds that those findings, those congressional findings, will change? And what do you think the congressional findings should be under our next welfare law?
Okay, you're all going to pass that one back and forth.
I'm not a very good prognosticator. Political feasibility, and I always tell my students, you should, as a first approximation, ignore political feasibility because we don't really know much about it. And we certainly now, given the election, not always the uncertainty of how this is going to turn out, we think that we're about to elect at least the House to shift to Republicans. Maybe that'll happen. Most likely will happen. We're not sure about the Senate, but we don't really know the dynamics of what's going to go on. The only thing, and this has to do with more of my being an optimist than anything else, the country has been moving right for 40 years until 2006 and 2008. We're due for a move left. We had a move left in 2006 and 2008. We don't, it's too early to tell what will be the resolution of that. So I don't know. This is short answer.
And we have a very short tagline on this, which is the goal of public welfare should be to increase human capital investment. And that then opens up a variety of different locales for how to increase human capital investment.
Well, thank you very much.
And thank you very
Thank you.
Yeah.